You wake before the sun, the pale gray light just beginning to seep through the shutters. The sound of gulls is already there, calling over the harbor as if they too have stalls to open. Your bones feel slow, but the air inside the small room is colder than the blankets, and the smell of yesterday's work clings faintly to the corner where your apron hangs. You put on the clothes you wore last market day because they are already steeped in the oil's scent. There is no point in spoiling clean ones. The street outside is narrow and damp, the cobblestones holding the chill. Down by the wharf, a damp mist hovers low, tasting faintly of salt and something more sour fish guts from yesterday's catch washed into the tide. The stalls stand waiting in a crooked row, most covered in stained canvas. You find yours in the middle, the boards warped but serviceable. The casks are where you left them, pushed up against the stall side and lashed together. Whale oil doesn't vanish overnight, not when the barrels are iron-hooped and stout. You untie the ropes, roll each barrel into place with a slow, leaning push. The iron bands are cold and wet with dew, your palms slipping unless you hold them just so. The smell blooms as the barrels settle thick, sweet, and oily, with that faintly rancid edge you've long stopped noticing. Others will notice. They always do. The harbor noises rise behind you. Dock workers grunt as they shift crates of molasses. A carter's wheels thump over a loose plank. Somewhere, a man is cursing at a stubborn horse. You listen without listening, adjusting the position of each barrel so the painted marks face forward. Buyers like to see the whaler stamps, though half the time they don't know what they mean. Historians still argue whether stalls like yours were formally assigned by the town or just claimed by whoever showed up early enough. Some records mention fees. Others say it was first come, first served. You've never seen a written rule, you simply come early. The damp works its way into your fingers, but the sky is turning lighter now, streaked with faint pink over the masts. You step back and look at your stall. It is exactly as it should be. Barrels in front, funnels and ladles laid on a clean rag, small measures hanging from their hooks. The day will be long. The smell will be worse. But the stall is ready. The fire in the small hearth crackles low, its light a soft flicker against the uneven plaster of the walls. You sit close, a worn stool beneath you, boots off and feet stretched toward the warmth. The day's clothes hang on a peg nearby, faint curls of steam rising from the damp patches where you scrubbed at the oil. They'll still smell tomorrow, of course they will, but for now, the sharpness has dulled to something you can almost ignore. Your hands rest in your lap, skin roughened and stained, the shadow of lampblack along your nails like permanent dusk. The coins from the day's sales are stacked neatly on the table, their small weight reassuring even if the pile is modest. A kettle hums quietly on the edge of the hearthstone, sending up a thin thread of steam. The air inside is warmer than the streets beyond, where the damp cobbles would still glisten faintly under the weak moonlight. You lean back slightly and close your eyes, listening to the muted world beyond the shutters. Somewhere far down the lane, a cart rattles home, its wheels clicking against the seams of the stones. A lone dog barks once, then falls silent. The sea's presence is still there. A faint, hollow sound in the distance waves against pilings, the echo of water in the harbor mouth. Historians still argue whether Boston's wharfside sellers in your trade truly kept such regular hours, or if they worked more sporadically, responding to the arrival of ships. You know only the rhythm of your own days, dawn to dusk, barrel to barrel. It has its own quiet gravity. The kettle sighs again, and you pour a small measure into a chipped mug, letting it rest on the stool beside you. You watch the fire instead, the glow softening the edges of the room. The oil smell is part of you now, woven into the grain of the table, the threads of your clothes, even your hair. You do not notice it unless you try. Your eyes grow heavier as the fire settles to embers, each small pop marking the slow passing of the last minutes before sleep. The chair creaks faintly as you shift, stretching your feet closer to the last warmth. The room holds steady in its quiet, the day folded neatly behind you. Tomorrow will come, and with it the same work, the same smells, the same coins. But for now, your eyes close, and the harbor drifts away. You square your stance and set your palms to the first cask, the wood cool and beaded with the faintest sweat of oil and dew. The staves are smooth where hands have worn them, rough where the cooper's plane left its grain proud. You rock the barrel gently to wake it, feeling the slow roll in your shoulders. It answers with a hollow slosh inside, thick, patient, like a creature that dislikes being roused. You breathe out and lean, guiding the iron band to the lip of a board, then easing it down with a muttered count you do not really need. 1, 2, 3. The barrel settles with a thud that trembles in your wrists. You keep your back straight and your breaths even. You have learned the shape of each cask, the ones that pull left, the ones that feel heavier for no reason, the one with the dark knot near the bung that will always try to bite your knuckles. You roll another into place, heel to toe, fingertips walking the hoop, nudging the weight with your legs more than your arms. The boards of the wharf answer underfoot with their damp, tired creak. The tide lifts and lowers the world by invisible inches, and you work within that slow rise like a miller who knows his wheel. A faint shine gathers where the last cask kissed the planks, a thin crescent of oil that the wood drinks as if it were rain. You reach for a wisp of tow and press it into the sheen, twisting it until the glimmer disappears. The stall smells stronger, now train oil rising, as the air warms by a degree you can feel only on the back of your neck. The smell will climb the ladder of the morning with you. It will sit on your hands like a small, stubborn cat. It will go nowhere. You bend to check the bungs. Each one sits true, wedged tight in its oval mouth. You rub your thumb along the cut marks and the pitch, making sure no bead collects to betray a seep. A good cooper is the difference between a day that pays and a day that stains. The cooper's tool marks tell you a story. The steady sweep of a jointer, the clean bite where our crows cut the groove, the iron hoops driven down until they sing against the wood. You don't need to see the man to know his habits by touch. It is steady work, this rolling, this nudging, this standing the casks side by side with their branded heads facing the lane. You prefer the heads to show. People put faith in letters and burnt marks even when they cannot read them. A stamp from a Nantucket house soothes a candlemaker's worry faster than any words you might offer. A painted sperm whale on a head turns a doubtful face into a nod. The proof of origin is as useful as a prayer. A gull watches from a piled coil of hemp, head cocked, bright eye greedy for anything that might be food. You give it none. You keep your hands busy, your mind slow, letting the small arithmetic of weight and reach and angle be enough. You work the next cask into the row, then the next, until you must pause to stretch your fingers and shake the night's stiffness out of your wrists. Your palms smell like iron from the hoops, your cuffs already darkening where they brushed a wet stave. A commonplace truth nests in the back of your thoughts as you work. The town's lamps and many of its kitchens depend on the stuff inside these barrels. Whale oil lights counting houses and hallways. It softens leather. It turns gears that would otherwise grind and squeal. That is the simple fact that buys bread and pays rent, the one that makes the weight worth moving. There are finer fuels spermaceti for those with coin, but the common light along these streets comes from what you sell. You set a small wedge beneath a barrel that likes to wander, and you think of a curious thing you were told by a sailor who swore he knew such matters. That some households drop a crumb of toasted bread into lamp oil to tame its smell, a trick learned from a widow who could not abide the smoke near her bed. You tried it once yourself and learned only that bread soaks oil like a sponge and does not improve your day. You keep the memory because it is the kind of odd advice people hand you when they cannot lift a cask but wish to be useful. It is easy to thank them and keep your buckets as they are. Historians still argue whether barrels for this trade were more often bound with iron hoops or wooden withes earlier in the century along these wharves, and how quickly one fashion gave way to the other. Some lists suggest iron was common enough by mid-century. Other inventories hint at wood lingering stubbornly, cheap and local. You do not quarrel with paper. You know only that iron hoops sing when you tap them, and that song tells you if a cask sits tight or wants attention. You listen and make your decisions with your fingers. You slide a chalk under the last cask and straighten, pushing your hands into the small of your back until your spine clicks like a shutter. The mist on the harbor has thinned, the nearest masts etched sharper against a primer gray sky. On the far side of the lane, the fishmonger's boy yawns into his sleeve, then begins setting out his boards. He works quickly, hoping to arrange a wall of silver bodies before your smell wakes. You will both pretend not to notice how his herring can be useful when the wind turns your way. Trade is a braid, and smells are part of the cord. You lay out the funnels on your rag, the small measures nested one inside another like cups, the ladle with its long neck and lip wiped clean and set to gleam as much as it can. The stall looks orderly now, the barrels squared, the marks aligned, your chalk at the ready to note a buyer's tally. The day is a table you have set evenly. If it chooses to wobble, it will not be the fault of your hands. You step aside, give the row a last measuring eye, and lean your shoulder to one cask to tuck it closer to its neighbor. The iron sings a little, the wood answers. The oil inside is as patient as night, and it waits for the measuring and the haggling and the steady tilt of the ladle that will come soon enough. For the moment, the work is only this: breath and weight, and the soft thud of wood meeting wood in a straight line that pleases you. They come in ones and twos at first, the way morning always does, quiet feet on damp boards, coat hems brushing the grain, breath clouding in the salt air. The first man is the same as most first men, a candle maker with a careful purse and a more careful nose. He pauses 2 steps from your stall, as if distance alone could soften the smell, and gives a small, resigned nod when it does not. "Gill and a half," he says, and you answer with a tilt of your head and a reach for the ladle. The oil sighs against iron as you lift it, a ribbon folding on itself before you steady the pour into his tin. The next is a housewife, with a lidded crock tucked in the crook of her arm, a shawl wrapped high enough to block half the air. She has the practiced look of someone who shops early to be done early. She keeps her eyes on your hands and not on the barrels, because looking at the barrels makes the smell feel larger. You measure by the gill, counting in your head the way you always do 1, 2, a breath, 3, then hold for her to nod. She nods and pays, and the coins leave a faint, clean circle in your oil-dark palm. You wipe them once against your apron and drop them into the pouch, where they will all end up smelling the same by nightfall. Behind her, a sailor lingers without buying, studying the marks on your barrel heads the way a man reads a sky, as if letters might tell him the chances of ice. He asks where the cask was tapped and when, and you answer in short words so he can keep feeling like he still knows the world after weeks at sea. He nods as if he approves your answers, though you suspect he simply likes the sound of talk that carries a whiff of ship about it. He moves on. His coat leaves a darker stripe in the air for a moment, tar over oil, rope over iron, sea over shore. A plain truth stands in front of you as steady as the barrel staves. This is what keeps Boston lit. Whale oil, coarser train oil for lamps and workrooms, feeds the town's small flames, while the pricier spermaceti, when it can be had, goes off to candle shops that promise a cleaner, brighter burn for those who can pay. That is as common as the cobbles underfoot. You do not need to say it out loud. You can see it in the way fingers tap the rim of a tin, the way eyes flick to the marks that claim a cask's origin. People like light that does not spit smoke into curtains. They do not always have the money for such fineness. A boy arrives with a stoneware jug and an expression of stiff duty. His mother has sent him. His nose would rather be anywhere else. He sets the jug down, clenches his jaw, and breathes through his mouth while you pour. You hand back the stoppered jug, and the boy groans as if the weight contains something worse than oil, the smell, the promise of carrying it through the lane where other boys will notice. He runs. The jug clacks against his knee as he goes. You let the corner of your mouth tilt, just enough to be a private joke you keep to yourself. From the fish stall side, a whiff of clean cold scales and crushed ice tries to elbow your smell aside. It does not win, but it throws a shawl over your shoulders for a minute or two. The fishmonger's wife glances over and lifts her chin in that way that says she will need oil later. Hooks and knives and boards all want a little slick to keep from biting too hard, and you nod back, filing the favor where small favors live. Trade does not often pay in only one direction. A quirky tale rides into your morning with a tinker whose cart jingles like a pocket full of buttons. He swears, while peering into your measure as if it hit a trick, that his aunt puts a twist of dried orange peel near her lamp to teach the smoke manners. He says it as though he has discovered a tame cat that eats only the mice he chooses. You do not argue with orange peel or ants. You have heard fennel stalks mentioned, a sprig of rosemary once, even a pinch of clean ash on a wick. People bring you these domestic talismans the way they bring you jars, stoppered, hopeful, and certain they will help. You sell oil that does what oil always does, and you let their household magic do what it will. Not all mornings agree about the rules. Historians still argue whether the town kept a strict hand on measures along the wharf in your century, requiring each gill and pint to be stamped and weighed, or whether enforcement arrived in bursts energetic when an inspector wanted to be seen, quiet when other matters pressed. You have seen seals on brass cups, and you have seen men squint at a ladle and call it good enough. In your stall, the measure is the same each day, because keeping your own peace is easier than defending it. The early light strengthens as if someone has trimmed the wick of the sky. More customers gather, most of them regulars. A leather dresser with cracked thumbs wants a pint to soften hides that would otherwise fight him. A man from a mill asks for the coarser oil at a fairer price, because his gears do not pause to admire a delicate scent. A cook from a tavern wants enough to light a back hallway where someone always forgets to carry a candle. Each request is plain. Each exchange is steady. Weight in and coin out, the same notes repeated on a slow instrument you have played so long your hands know the air between the strings. You keep a rag under the measure now because you have learned the habit of small preventions. A stray drop will still find a way, bead and slide, then choose its own direction like a stubborn thought. You capture most of them with the rag, then wring it later into the sacrificial jar you use for greasing the cart axle. Nothing is wasted, not when waste smells like this. A woman in a worn cap holds her crock out and asks in a low voice if today's cask is from the same ship as last week. Last week's burned warmer, she says, and her boy slept to it as if the flame were breathing beside him. You tell her the truth you have, that this head bears a brand from Nantucket, as did the other, that the oil has the same soft color, that the tap is fresh. She nods as if you have declared a blessing. You pour carefully, and she carries the warmth of her belief away with the weight. By now, the line has grown into the gentle chaos that fills a morning without ever breaking it. A tradesman jokes about whether you will sell smaller noses at a discount. A clerk debates with a cart driver about the merits of flat versus rounded wick flat for steadiness, rounded for draw with the certainty of men who have learned enough to lecture and not enough to end the topic. You listen without choosing a side. Your ladle holds perfectly still, and the oil answers gravity the same way no matter what wicks do. You think for a moment about the talk you sometimes hear that unscrupulous sellers stretch their oil with fish drippings or thin it with something sourer still. Maybe some do. The town sniffs and peers and finds now and then, and yet the rumors never quite die. Historians still argue whether adulteration was common or merely a favorite complaint, the way people grumble about weight and measure whenever a coin leaves their hand. You carry your barrels honest because it is easier to sleep when the fire on your hearth burns steady. Sleep is the only luxury you can always afford. Toward the end of the first small rush, you look up and the wharf has ripened into day. The masts are dark lines against a sky that has taken on a pale wash of blue, and the ropes on the nearest ship tick against wood like a clock that forgets itself until the wind reminds it. You set a lid on the measure and rest your fingers, counting the empties that have gone and the tins that will return later so their owners can say the day's lamp did not smoke. You let the smell rise and settle around you, a weather you know, and you nod to the next customer the way you nod to the tide come along. Then we have our business between us. You set the brass gill measure on the worn plank, its rim cool against your palm. The ladle dips into the barrel with a sound like a slow breath through wet cloth, oil folding over itself in patient swirls. You raise it, steadying your wrists so the stream falls clean into the waiting jug. The thickness catches the light amber, with shadows curling inside like smoke caught in glass. You stop before the lip, let the last thread slide free, then tap the ladle once against the measure's edge. The customer, a cooper's wife, watches every movement. She is not mistrustful, only precise. She has seen too many careless hands waste more than a drop. She leans in slightly, sniffing the rim before you hand it over. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she nods once, the way someone does when a familiar scent says the thing they hoped. You cork her jug with a twist of rag, take her coins, and stack them neatly with their dull edges matching. The next buyer asks for 2 gills and counts the pour under her breath, the way some count stitches. You let her finish her quiet tally before stoppering the crock. In this trade, the measure is both fact and performance. They must see the pour, hear the count, and watch your hands do what they have always done. The oil clings to the inside of the ladle like honey refusing to leave its spoon. You wipe it with a twist of clean toe, your fingers already slippery from the morning's first sails. The smell climbs your sleeves, a steady companion that does not ask permission. You no longer bother to chase it away. Even if you scrubbed here and now, it would return before noon. There is a plain fact that everyone in Boston's working lanes knows. A gill is a gill, and in this business, short measures earn more enemies than thin oil. Candle makers rely on you not only for the stuff that burns, but for the quiet certainty that what they buy will last the length they expect. Skimp a measure once, and a rumor will run faster than a gull after bread. A curious bit of talk drifts back to you now and again, someone claiming that if you store oil in a crock lined with salt, it will somehow burn cleaner. You've never tried it. Salt is dear enough for food, and the thought of it mingling with the oil makes your fingers itch. Still, you've heard it more than once, passed along like a family recipe from households that insist their lamp chimneys stay clear longer. Whether it's the salt or the pride in the telling, you couldn't say. Historians still argue whether most sellers in your century measured strictly by volume, as you do, or whether weight was ever used for common buyers. Some early records mention weighing small lots, others only speak of the gill and the pint. Here on the wharf, weight would be a slower affair, and the tide does not pause for scales. Volume is quick, visible, and leaves no space for quarrel. The cooper's wife has gone, replaced by a man in an apron spotted with wax. He wants a pint for dipping wicks, and he leans over your stall to watch the pour as if the oil's surface could tell him a secret. He dips one finger in, rubs it between thumb and forefinger, then nods approval. You've learned that in this trade, some want to see, some want to smell, and a few insist on touching. It's easier to allow each in turn than to argue about which sense best judges oil. The gill cups rest upside down on the rag, watermarks from yesterday's wash fading into the grain. You set them right again, handles facing the same way, a habit born from mornings when you had to reach for the next before your mind had time to name it. Order keeps the day from stumbling. A gull lands on the edge of the stall, head cocked. It watches you measure out another gill, as if hoping the stream will somehow spill into its reach. You wave it off gently. The gull shifts 2 boards down and resumes its watch. The bird has learned your pace, and it knows there is always a moment when your eyes are on the pour and not the edge of the table. Your hands keep the rhythm. Ladle into barrel, tilt into measure, stop before the lip, tap the ladle, wipe with toe. Each action slides into the next like links in a chain, smooth from years of use. The coins pile slowly, the barrel surface lowering by a breath at a time. This is the day's true clock, not the sun climbing the masts, not the gulls changing their calls, but the quiet settling of oil inside the staves. The candle makers arrive in their usual way together, but not speaking much, each carrying a tin or crock, as if it were an extension of their own hand. They have the same stoop in their shoulders, the same tight squint against the harbor light, the same faint smudge of wax on their cuffs. You know each by the sound of their footfalls on the wharf planks, but you greet them all with the same slow nod. One of them, a thin man with a wax-brittle beard, asks the question he always asks, "Is it fresh?" You could point to the tap marks, to the clean sheen inside the bunghole, but you just say, "Tapped yester evening." He gives the smallest grunt of approval. Candle makers like their oil as fresh as the wind will allow less smoke, fewer complaints from customers who would rather not have the smell of a whale's last voyage drifting through their front room. You fill each tin to the exact mark they expect. A pint for this one, 3 gills for that one. No more, no less. You've learned that an extra finger's width is not kindness here. It throws off their counts, and their wicks will sulk if the balance of oil to tallow to wax is not just so. The workroom demands a certain burn, and the oil is part of that recipe. There's the well-known truth of it. Whale oil, even train oil, burns steadier than most other fats they can get in bulk. Fish oil smokes. Tallow gutters and drafts. But train oil, thick, patient, and carefully strained, feeds a flame that can hold its place through a long evening of carding wool or mending sails. That steadiness is what sells it. One of the men leans in as you pour, sniffing with the narrowed eyes of someone who once caught another seller cutting his oil with something sour. "Doesn't bite," he says, which is as much praise as you will get from him. You've never tampered with a cask, but suspicion moves through the wharf like mist slow, settling on everyone. A quirky bit of gossip passes between the candle makers as they wait. One swears that somewhere in London, there's a man who strains his oil through a cloth woven of horsehair, claiming it takes out the winter taste. Another insists it's nonsense that the only thing horsehair will do is leave a new kind of hair in your lamp. You let them talk. If they want to imagine far-off Londoners fussing over horsehair filters, it costs you nothing. Historians still argue whether colonial candle makers in Boston preferred sperm oil exclusively when they could get it, or if they willingly mixed in train oil for economy's sake. Some surviving account books show separate tallies for each. Others make no distinction at all. Here on the wharf, you sell what's in your casks, and buyers take what they can pay for. One of the younger candle makers, still new enough that he hasn't yet learned to keep his cuffs clean, pays you in coins so fresh from the mint it still has its bite. You weigh it in your palm before dropping it into your pouch. The older men shake their heads faintly, not at you, but at the lad for showing his purse so plainly. The haggling begins in its quiet, predictable way. If I take 4 pints, you'll round down a penny? If I take 6, you'll call it even on the court. You shake your head for the first, nod once for the second. Price is not just about the oil, it's about the rhythm you've set for the day. Too many bargains early, and the afternoon feels lopsided. One of them produces a scrap of wick from his pocket and dips it into the ladle, setting it alight to watch the flame. It burns with a steady yellow tongue, curling once before holding straight. He snuffs it with a pinch and nods. The others seem satisfied by the test, though you suspect they already knew the answer before they arrived. They leave in 2s and 3s, crocks heavy in their arms, wax spots on their sleeves catching the light. You watch them go, noting the way their steps lean slightly to keep the oil from sloshing against the lids. They'll be back tomorrow or the next day, their needs as regular as the tide. You wipe your ladle, hang it on its nail, and lean your elbows on the stall for a moment. The smell is thicker now, the air warmer, the light sharper on the water. Somewhere upriver, a bell tolls the hour. Though here, the only clock you trust is the level inside the cask. The sun edges higher, and with it comes the long groan of a ship easing against its moorings. The wharf wakes and full ropes slap the water, pulleys creak, men shout instructions half swallowed by gulls. You glance down the lane just in time to see 2 new barrels trundling your way on a handcart, their iron hoops ringing faintly with each bump. The carter's face is set in the flat look of a man who has pushed heavy things too many mornings to count. You step out from behind the stall to meet him. The cart smells of oak and brine, with the deeper, warmer scent of the oil pushing through the wood. He stops short of your boards, wipes his brow with the back of his hand, and gestures at the casks. Straight from the ship, he says, not bothering to name it. You can see the fresh chalk on the heads, the brand burned deep and still dark. You and the carter roll each barrel into place, the weight shifting in a slow, lazy way that threatens to overbalance if you're not patient. The wood leaves damp arcs on the planks, darker than the surrounding boards. Once settled, you lean against one, feeling the warmth where the sun has just begun to touch its upper curve. The air changes again, thicker, richer, the smell of the ocean riding under the train oil's heaviness. There's the plain fact. New barrels mean new trade. Buyers like the idea of oil fresh from the voyage, as if it carries the light of another place. The candle makers will be back once they hear, and perhaps even a few housewives who've been holding out for the next ship's stock. A curious thing you've heard repeated enough to make you half believe it is that some whalers swear the oil from a voyage with many calm days burns cleaner than oil from a rough passage. They say the barrels roll less in calm seas, letting the oil settle and clear. Whether there's truth in it or it's just a sailor's way of making peace with boredom, you can't say. Historians still argue whether wharfside sellers like you truly bought direct from the ship in the 18th century or if most trade was mediated through merchants with their own storage. Records show both arrangements. Here, you take what the cart brings, and you pay in coin or credit depending on the man who pushes it. Once the carter leaves, you mark each new cask with a chalk slash on the bunk side, your own quiet way of remembering which ones came together. You'll watch their levels over the next weeks, noting which empty first, which take longer to draw down. Some oil moves quickly, other barrels linger as if the town senses something in them you can't smell. The wharf's noise swells as another ship noses into view, sails loose and gray from the damp. Crates of molasses are hauled off one pier, a hogshead of rum from another. You nod at a cooper walking past with a hoop over his shoulder, knowing you may need him before the day is out. You set your hands on the rim of a new barrel and listen to the muffled sound inside, a slow, deep shift like wind through a narrow street. It is a patient thing, oil, and it will wait for its turn at the ladle. For now, you step back, wipe your palms, and let the rest of the morning come to you. From the other side of the wharf comes the sound of a knife working through scales, a wet scrape followed by the soft thud of fish hitting wood. The neighbor's stall is already lined with neat rows of herring, their silver skins catching the thin sunlight. The fishmonger himself is bent over the table, sleeves rolled and forearms glistening, working with the speed of a man who knows freshness does not linger. You've shared this stretch of boards with him for years. His work smells cleaner, at first light sharp, briny, even pleasant in its own way, but by midday it will have the same heavy insistence as yours. Still, there is an advantage to his presence. When the wind turns your way, the smell of fish rides in front of the whale oil, softening its first bite. Buyers notice, though they rarely say so. A plain fact is that stalls on the wharf often cluster by type of goods, yet fish and oil make a pairing that serves both. Fishmongers keep their own hooks, knives, and boards oiled against rust, and oil sellers find their scent masked by the sea's own harvest. It's a quiet bargain that doesn't need words. He catches your eye now, raising his knife in greeting. You nod back, lifting the ladle in reply. Later in the morning, he might send a boy over for a gill of oil to rub into a stubborn hinge or to trade for a bit of salted catch at day's end. It's not formal barter, just neighborly balance. A quirky thing about him, he swears he can tell how long a ship has been in harbor by the sound of the gulls around it. He says the birds grow lazier after 3 days, no longer crying so sharply, as if they know the easy pickings are gone. You've never listened close enough to prove or disprove it, but he insists he's right. Historians still argue whether the mingling of fish and oil stalls was a matter of choice or necessity in colonial Boston. Some maps show them together on the same pier. Other accounts speak of strict separation, especially in warmer months when smells grew sharp. Here, the pairing is simply what the wharf has given you, and you take it as it comes. The fishmonger's boy, barefoot, despite the cold, trots over with a pail to fetch water from a barrel kept for rinsing knives. He pauses to glance at your casks, wrinkling his nose just enough to make you smirk. You watch him carry the sloshing bucket back, leaving a trail of dark spots on the boards that the sun will erase in an hour. You set your hands on the stall's edge and take in the steady picture before you. The glint of herring scales, the slow gleam of oil in the ladle, the rhythm of boots and voices moving between stalls. The air is layered salt, smoke, fish, oil, and you breathe it in the way you might a familiar song. Not because it is sweet, but because it is yours. It happens so quickly you almost miss the start of it, a soft, wet sound as the bottom of a cask gives the smallest sigh, followed by the slow, treacherous gleam of oil slipping down onto the planks. You know the look of it instantly. A spill. Not a dramatic gush, just enough to turn the boards into a trap for the next hurried boot. You fetch the bundle of tow kept for such moments and crouch low, pressing the fibers into the slick. The oil rises into it stubbornly, as if unwilling to be taken back, and you twist the cloth tight to wring it into a waiting jar. Some sellers would toss it, but you save every drop later. It might ease the wheels of a handcart or soften a hinge. Waste and profit never sit far apart here. The wharf under you is worn smooth, the boards bowed slightly with years of salt and sun. A spill can travel faster than you think, sliding between planks to the shadows below. You've seen men go down hard when a careless step meets a hidden slick, and though it's not your boot, it would still be your stall blamed for it. The plain fact is that oil is more dangerous to feet than ice. It has no season, no warning except the way it catches the light. That's why you keep the toe close and your eyes sharper than your hands when the barrels are newly set. A quirky memory surfaces while you work. An old seller once swore by scattering clean sand over a spill, sweeping it up before anyone noticed. He claimed it saved more oil than tow. You tried it once and found the opposite grit in the cask, and a mess that clung to your tools for a week. You keep to tow now. Historians still argue whether wharf boards in your century were ever treated to resist oil and water, or if they were simply left to soak up whatever the day brought. Some suggest pitch or pine tar was used. Others believe bare wood was the norm, cheap to replace when worn through. From the stains and scents under your stall, you'd say bare wood wins that argument. You work the last of the slick out of the grain, then rub the boards dry with the clean edge of your cloth. The smell blooms stronger as you do, rising to remind you that a small spill can carry far. You toss the soaked toe into a bucket set aside for just such rags. From the corner of your eye, you catch the fishmonger's boy watching with open curiosity. You meet his gaze and raise an eyebrow. He shrugs as if to say he was only learning. You suppose he was. There's no shortage of small lessons on this wharf, and most aren't written anywhere. When you stand again, the boards show only a faint, dark halo where the spill had been. It will fade to match the rest soon enough. You set the jar of recovered oil on a back shelf, one more small rescue that will not be noticed, except by you. The tide is halfway up the pilings when your stomach reminds you it has been working as long as your hands. The wharf's air has shifted less chill now, though still thick with the mingled scents of salt, fish, and the steady undercurrent of your barrels. You reach for the small cloth bundle tucked under the counter and unfold it to reveal a heel of bread, a wedge of cheese, and the thin knife you've carried for years. You cut slowly, not out of care for the bread. It is already 2 days old, but because you want the moment to stretch. The cheese is sharp and dry, a bit crumbly at the edge, the kind that bites back even through the oil-scented air. You balance each bite with a swallow from the small flask of ale at your feet, the taste cool and faintly bitter. The plain fact is that meals on the wharf are rarely taken in peace. Your eyes keep to the lane, watching for customers who might come while your mouth is still full. A merchant might arrive mid-bite, a candle maker wanting to just fetch a gill before his next chore. You've learned to chew quickly and keep your answers short until the last swallow is gone. From a few stalls down, the fishmonger's boy calls out something you can't quite catch over the clatter of a handcart. When the sound clears, you realize he's asking if you want a piece of smoked mackerel with your bread. You wave him over and he brings a strip wrapped in paper, the skin dark and shiny. You trade him a crust of bread and watch him tear into it with the enthusiasm only a boy can manage. A quirky bit of harbor talk floats back to you as you eat. Some swear that if you eat smoked fish while working with oil, the smell on your hands lingers less. You've never believed it, though you've noticed that after a piece of mackerel, you're less likely to notice the oil's weight in your own nose for a while. Whether that's a trick of the senses or the fish doing some strange magic, you can't decide. Historians still argue whether workers on the wharf took fixed breaks or simply ate when the day allowed. Some accounts suggest a noon bell, others imply that sellers grabbed minutes here and there, as you do without ceremony. In your own practice, the time is chosen by your stomach and by the absence of buyers. Halfway through the bread, a man approaches with a tin under one arm. You set your food aside, wipe your hands on your apron, and serve him without hurry. He notices the cheese on the counter and asks if it's from the farm near Dedham. You tell him yes, though it's been a week since it left there. He pays and leaves, the smell of the oil following him like a shadow. When your food is gone, you fold the cloth and tuck it away again, leaving only the knife on the counter for cutting twine or sealing wax. The ale flask goes back to its place at your feet, a small reserve for later in the day. Your hands are ready again, your stall set as it was, the rhythm of the wharf waiting for the next step. The inspectors arrive without fanfare, though you feel their presence before you see them. Two men in dark coats, hats pulled low, moving with the deliberate pace of those who believe their work outweighs yours. They pause at the edge of your stall, glancing from barrelhead to barrelhead as though the marks might confess something. One produces a narrow iron tool, more a hook than a probe, and runs it along the edge of a bung. The metal makes a faint scrape, and he leans in to sniff. The other stands with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes moving over your measures, your ledger, the rag on which your ladle rests. They speak little, and when they do, it's in the half-mutter of men who've done this 100 times. The plain fact is that the town keeps a wary hand on its oil cellars. A bad cask can foul more than a lamp. It can foul a reputation, and in Boston's narrow streets, such news runs faster than the tide. The inspectors claim to protect the public, but you suspect they also protect the merchants whose ships bring the casks to shore. One leans over the open barrel you've been drawing from and inhales sharply. He asks when it was tapped. You answer without hesitation. He dips a finger into the oil, rubs it between thumb and forefinger, then wipes it on the inside of his coat hem, an old habit you've seen before. If it leaves no grit, they're satisfied. A curious moment passes when one of them spots the small jar you keep for recovered drippings. He picks it up, turns it in his hand, and sets it back without comment. You wonder if he knows it's for greasing hinges and not for sale. You do not offer to explain. Historians still argue whether colonial inspectors truly had the skill to judge oil quality by smell and touch alone, or if much of their work was ceremony meant to reassure buyers. Some records suggest they relied on taste, though you've yet to see a man here put his lips to whale oil. They move on to the next stall after a final nod, leaving behind the faint disturbance of having been under scrutiny. You set your ladle back in place and check the bung yourself, though you know it hasn't shifted. The oil's surface is still in dark, holding the morning's light in a broken oval. The fishmonger glances over from his stall and smirks. "Still honest, then?" he calls, his knife flashing silver as it slices another herring. You don't bother to answer. The question doesn't need one. You've nothing to hide, and the inspectors have nothing left to say. You wipe your hands on your apron, feeling the familiar mix of oil and grain under your palms. The day hasn't changed, though the barrels seem to stand a little straighter now, as if pleased to have passed another test. With the inspectors gone, the stall exhales in its own quiet way. The customers thin for a spell, leaving the lane between stalls open enough for the breeze to wander through. It carries bits of talk from further down prices for salt cod, the quality of last night's rum, a wager on when the next Nantucket whaler will arrive. The words mingle with the creak of ropes and the soft bump of hulls against the pier. You rest your elbows on the edge of the stall, half listening as other sellers trade their own small news. The cooper says a ship from New Bedford came in light, most of its casks already spoken for. A tallow seller mutters that the weather's turning, though the sky above you is pale and empty of cloud. A boy passing with a basket of bread stops to share that the baker's wife is expecting, though whether he means a child or a delivery of flour, you can't be sure. The plain fact is that the wharf is as much a place for news as it is for trade. Every stall is a station on the same line, the gossip running as surely as any cart along the boards. You learn which ship made port without losing a man, which merchant has taken ill, and which streets are worth avoiding come nightfall, all without ever leaving your spot. One of the fishmongers calls across about a rumor. A ship spotted off Cape Ann, sails patched in a way that marks her as a whaler. Could be a fortnight before she ties up here, could be tomorrow if the wind turns right. Such talk swells and fades, but you store it away. A fresh ship means fresh oil, and fresh oil means customers planning ahead. A quirky scrap of conversation drifts from the far end of the pier, someone claiming that a sailor brought back a lantern with glass from France, shaped so that it bends the light wider than any common lamp. The teller insists it will save half the oil in a season. You've heard enough of these savings to know that most end with the lamp burning the same and the oil disappearing just as quickly. Still, you picture it for a moment, a strange globe of light sweeping a wider circle on a winter night. Historians still argue whether colonial harbor gossip was a reliable way to track incoming ships or merely a pastime for idle moments. Some journals suggest sellers kept careful lists based on hearsay. Others say most learned of arrivals only when the masts were in sight. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between half guesswork, half watching the horizon. The lull stretches on just long enough for you to check your tools, wiping the ladle handle again, setting the funnels neatly side by side. The sun has shifted high enough to catch in the rim of your tallest barrel, the light skimming the oil's surface like a thin coin. The smell is as constant as your own breath, but the air carries a faint trace of smoke from somewhere inland, a reminder that the day will pass whether the ship comes in or not. The woman arrives with her shawl pulled high, a crock cradled in her arms as if it were something delicate. You recognize her at once. She was here last week, and the week before that. She does not greet you so much as step directly to the counter, setting the crock down with the care one might give a sleeping child. Her face is set, though her eyes move quickly to the barrels. "The last oil smoked too much," she says, her voice low but firm. You nod slowly, letting her words settle in the space between you. Complaints are not rare, but they are never thrown out lightly. The oil is part of her daily light, and a poor burn turns every corner of her home a shade darker. You tip your head toward the cask you tapped 2 days ago and explain that this batch came from a different voyage. The plain fact is that the quality shifts whales taken later in the season, barrels stowed too near the galley heat, weeks of rolling seas all leave their own signature in the oil. She listens, the tight line at her mouth softening only a little. With her permission, you draw a gill and set it in the light so she can see the color. She peers into the measure, her fingers resting on the rim, then lifts it close enough to catch the scent. After a moment, she nods, though not as though the matter is entirely settled. You pour it carefully into her crock, watching the surface rise to the exact point she prefers. A curious thing you've heard from more than one housewife, that adding a pinch of finely ground eggshell to the lamp oil can sweeten the burn. You've never tried it, and you've never asked too closely how they came to believe it works. Perhaps it's the same impulse that has them hang sprigs of mint in their kitchens not for use, but for the sense of freshness it promises. Historians still argue whether households in 18th century Boston routinely mixed additives into their oil to improve the flame, or if such practices were more rumor than habit. The surviving account books list purchases plainly oil by the gill or pint, but they don't record what happened once the jar crossed a threshold. When you hand back her crock, she presses the coin into your palm with a firmness that feels like both payment and a small warning. She will be watching how this batch burns. You nod once, keeping your own voice even. Satisfied enough for now, she turns back toward the lane, her shawl catching the faintest edge of the fish stall's scent as she passes. You wipe the rim of the measure, set it back in its place, and glance at the level in the cask. It has lowered only a little, though the memory of her complaint feels heavier than the oil itself. Still, the day rolls forward. Another customer steps up, and the rhythm begins again. The sun climbs toward its highest point, and with it, the air thickens. The harbor's breeze grows sluggish, heavy with the mingled odors of salt, tar, fish, and the low, persistent sweetness of oil that has been sitting in barrels under a warming sky. You feel it gathering on your skin, a faint tackiness that no amount of wiping will keep away. The plain fact is that oil does not care for heat. Left too long in the sun, it grows looser, more eager to cling to whatever it touches. The casks themselves seem to breathe under the warmth, releasing their scent in slow, stubborn sighs. Customers notice. You've seen them wrinkle their noses more quickly on afternoons like this, even those who've bought from you for years. A cooper passes by, his apron dark with fresh pitch, and glances toward your barrels. Best keep 'em shaded, he says, jerking his chin toward a scrap of canvas folded behind your stall. You thank him, though you already know the trick. Draped just so, the cloth keeps the sun from striking the upper curve of the staves, slowing the oil's warm exhale. You pull it over the casks, the smell blooming for a moment as the fabric settles. A quirky bit of lore comes to mind, one you heard from a ship's mate last summer. He claimed that on certain voyages, the crew would stack barrels in alternating layers of whale oil and molasses, believing the sweetness kept the oil from turning sour. You've no idea if it works, and you can't imagine the mess if one leaked into the other, but he swore it was true. Historians still argue whether colonial sellers took special precautions for oil in the warmer months, or if such measures were only adopted later when storage houses improved. Some suggest merchants ordered smaller deliveries in summer to avoid spoilage. Others claim the trade carried on unchanged, heat or no heat. On the wharf, you simply work with what you have, shade when you can, speed when you can't. The boards beneath your feet feel warmer now, the tar in the seams softening under the midday sun. From the fish stall, the sharper tang of mackerel begins to edge out the cleaner scent of the morning's herring. You notice the fishmonger dousing his table with a fresh bucket of seawater, the splash carrying a moment's coolness into the still air. A pair of customers arrive together, a cooper's apprentice and a young maid from a house along Milk Street, both holding small jars. They chat with each other as you pour, though their eyes drift to the canvas you've laid over the barrels. Keeps it better, you explain, and they nod, as if shading a cask is a kind of magic. When they've gone, you lift the canvas just enough to check the level in the barrel you're drawing from. The oil glistens in the light, patient as ever, waiting for the next ladle. You set the cloth back, tying it at the edges to keep the wind from lifting it, and return to your place at the counter. The day's heat is far from over, but the shade will help. It is the kind of small act no one remarks on unless it's forgotten, then everyone remembers. From the corner of your stall, you hear the sharp ping of iron shifting against wood. It's the sound of a barrel hoop working loose a small thing, but one that can turn into a slow, wasteful leak if left alone. You step over to the cask and see it immediately. The top hoop has crept upward, leaving a thin gap in the staves near the bung. The plain fact is that no barrel lasts forever without attention. The wood swells and shrinks with the weather. The iron hoops expand in summer heat and contract in the cold, and a loosened hoop means a barrel that will not hold its shape for long. A good cooper can fix it in minutes. A bad one will make you wish you'd left it alone. You call to the cooper working 2 stalls down, and he ambles over with his driver and hoop hammer in hand. He runs a finger along the stave gap, nods once, and sets to work. The hammer's flat face rings against the iron with a rhythm you've heard your whole working life, steady, deliberate strikes that travel through the boards into the soles of your feet. The hoop slides down with each blow, snugging into its groove until the gap closes and the cask looks whole again. A quirky thing you remember from an older seller. He once swore that a loose hoop on a barrel of whale oil would make the oil taste nervous, as though the wood's unease passed into the liquid. You've never heard anyone else say it, and you suspect he meant it as a joke, but it's stuck with you all the same. Historians still argue whether most wharfside sellers kept a cooper on hand or simply sent damaged barrels upriver for repair. Some records show cooperages right by the docks. Others suggest repairs were done only when barrels were emptied. Here, you've always found it best to fix the trouble where it stands. Oil waits for no one, and neither do leaks. When the last strike lands, the cooper steps back, wipes his hammer on his apron, and tells you to keep the barrel shaded for the rest of the day. You pay him in coin and a mouthful of water from your flask, and he returns to his own work without another word. You run your hand over the repaired hoop. It sits flush now, no play in the iron. The barrel will hold until it's empty, and perhaps longer if the weather stays kind. You set your tools back in order, listening as the wharf swallows the hammer's echoes into its larger rhythm of ropes creaking, gulls calling, and boots knocking against wood. The cask is sound again. You return to your ladle, knowing the work goes on, whether the repair was needed today or not. The afternoon light has shifted to a flatter tone, softening the edges of the masts and sails in the distance. 2 sailors drift toward your stall, their steps slow with the tiredness of men who've been too long at sea. Their coats are salt stiff, their faces browned and lined, and one still smells faintly of the tarred rope coiled over his shoulder. They don't come to buy. Sailors rarely do. The oil is meant for those who stay ashore. But they linger by your barrels, tracing the brands with their eyes, as if reading the record of where they've been. You pour a measure for another customer, and they begin to talk not to you exactly, but into the space you share. The plain fact is that news from the north always travels faster through the mouths of sailors than through any letter. They speak of ice thick along the coast of Labrador, of storms that split a mast clean and drove them into unfamiliar harbors. They talk about catches leaner than expected, whales harder to find, and how every barrel filled this season carries the weight of more effort than the last. One of them mentions a ship turned back early, holds empty, after its crew grew sick. The other says he heard it was scurvy. The first insists it was fever. You let them argue. Out here, truth shifts with each teller, and the details matter less than the shape of the story. A quirky fragment slips into their talk about a mate who swore he could tell the health of a whale from the sound of its breath in the cold air. Like a man with a clear nose or a stuffed one? The sailor says, grinning. You don't know if he's mocking the idea or protecting it. Historians still argue whether 18th century whaling voyages truly grew shorter when ice pressed down from the north, or whether crews simply adapted routes and habits without cutting their time at sea. Records show both long and short seasons, the reasons shifting like the wind. You suppose the truth is carried in the bones of the men who return and the oil in the casks they leave behind. As they move on, one claps the side of your stall, leaving a faint salt mark on the weathered wood. Their voices fade into the broader noise of the pier, and you are left with the slow sway of the harbor and the smell of your trade. The casks stand as they did before, but somehow they feel heavier, as if their contents now hold pieces of far-off ice and distant winds. You dip the ladle again, the work resuming without ceremony. The oil runs just as it did before the sailors came, steady and thick, untouched by the telling of storms. She comes near closing of the mid-afternoon run, her pace slower than most, her shawl faded to the color of old parchment. You know her by sight and by story, the widow whose husband was lost on a whaling voyage 2 winters past. She buys in small amounts, just enough to keep her lamp lit through the dark hours, and she always counts her coins twice before handing them over. Today she stands a little longer at the counter, fingers resting on the strap of the small stoneware jug she's brought. Her voice is soft when she asks the price, softer still when she tells you she might not manage a full gill. The plain fact is that not everyone can afford the light they wish for, and the market doesn't bend for sentiment. But you can. You tell her that today's oil is running clear and that you'll fill her jug for what she has. Her eyes lift briefly in surprise, then she nods without ceremony. You draw from the cask with your slowest, steadiest pour, letting the surface rise just shy of the lip. She watches as you cork it and wipe the rim with a clean edge of tow. A curious bit of talk you once heard about her husband comes back to you now, how he could judge the size of a whale by the shape of its spout, even from half a mile off. Sailors swore by it, though you suspect they also liked the neatness of the tail. You never asked her if it was true. Historians still argue whether sellers like you often gave such quiet allowances to those in need, or if such kindnesses were rare exceptions. Records and ledgers show only the sums paid, never the coins forgone. The truth, as you know it, is that some trades keep room for such choices, and others grind them down. She thanks you without embellishment, the kind of gratitude that lives in the meeting of eyes rather than in words. As she walks away, you see her pause by the fish stall, speaking to the monger's wife. The jug swings gently from her hand, its weight a little more than she'd expected to carry home. You return to your place at the counter, setting the ladle on its rag. The barrel's level has dropped by only a finger's width, yet it feels as though more than oil has left it. Some days the measure you give is not just for the lamps. It begins with a flicker in the corner of your sight, a faint darting motion low to the boards. You glance down just in time to see a pair of whiskers vanish between the gaps. The rats are back. Not the brazen kind that take to the planks in daylight, but the quick, cautious ones that know the rhythm of stalls and cellars. The plain fact is that the wharf will always have them. Between the fish scraps, grain sacks, and leaking casks of anything edible, there's enough to keep their families well fed without ever showing themselves to the casual eye. You keep your stall tidy, but the boards beneath it belong as much to them as to you. One scurries into view again, a small crust in its mouth, likely something dropped from your own midday bread. It pauses, nose twitching, before darting toward the shadow under the fishmonger's table. He'll notice soon enough and send his boy to stomp along the boards, though the rats always seem to know which steps are serious and which are bluff. A quirky memory surfaces of a barrel man you once knew who swore he could keep rats away by soaking rope ends in whale oil and laying them in a ring around his goods. "They don't like the smell," he'd said, grinning through a mouthful of missing teeth. You doubted it then and doubt it now. If anything, you suspect the rats see it as seasoning. Historians still argue whether 18th century wharves had any effective pest control beyond cats, dogs, and the occasional half-hearted trap. Some journals describe coordinated efforts. Others suggest the problem was simply endured. Here, endurance seems the truer account. You watch as another whiskered shape slips between barrels 2 stalls down, bold enough to pause and clean its paws in the open. The gulls take no notice. Rats are no competition for fish guts, and the harbor keeps on breathing its slow, tidal breath. Reaching down, you nudge a loose scrap of cloth further under the stall, more out of habit than hope. The rats will take it or leave it. They were here before your barrels arrived, and they'll be here after they've rolled away. The lane quiets for a moment, the only sound the faint creak of rope on the nearest mast. Somewhere below, the rat finds its hiding place. You straighten up, wipe your hands on your apron, and turn back to the next customer stepping toward your counter. The day doesn't pause for whiskers. By mid-afternoon, the lane has thinned to the steady trickle of regulars who know when the crowds are gone. One of them is a broad-shouldered man in a leather apron, smelling faintly of tallow and ash, the candle maker who buys in bulk. He arrives with a small cart, its sides reinforced to carry the weight of multiple tins without splitting. He tips his hat in greeting and sets a row of empty containers on your counter. Each has a narrow mouth, built for pouring without spills, though you know they'll still come back to you with rings of dried oil around the lip. You take the first, draw your ladle deep into the cask, and pour in a long, slow stream until the tin's weight settles into your palm. The plain fact is that bulk buyers like him keep your trade steady. Households might buy a gill or a pint at a time, but a candle maker will take gallons if the oil is good and the price fair. One day's order from him can be the equal of a week's worth of small sales. He watches as you fill each tin, making small notes in a ledger tucked into his apron. You recognize the neatness of his marks, precise, as if the numbers must stand up to some later inspection. Between pours, he speaks of his week's work, a rush of orders for weddings, the difficulty of getting good wicks, the constant complaints about smoke from customers who want light without smell. A curious bit of advice he passes along half in jest is that one of his buyers claims to hang her new candles over a basin of vinegar for a day before using them, swearing it, draws the whale out of them. You can't imagine the vinegar doing more than adding another scent to the mix, but you nod as if considering it seriously. Historians still argue whether whale oil sold for candle making in 18th century Boston was ever significantly altered before use, or whether the refining happened entirely at sea and in the cooperage. Some sources suggest local filtering or settling. Others insist the oil went straight from barrel to wick. Watching him work, you suspect the latter. When the last tin is full, he stacks them carefully on his cart, tying them down with a web of rope. You count the coins into your pouch, feeling their weight grow against your hip. He nods once, the kind of parting that holds no extra words because none are needed. As he rolls away, the stall feels momentarily lighter, the barrels standing with a touch more space between them. You straighten your tools and wipe the counter, the smell of fresh poured oil hanging in the air like a slow bell that takes its time to fade. The cart has barely rattled out of sight when you reach for your ledger, a small leather-bound book with pages warped from years of damp and oil-smudged hands. The cover creaks as you open it, the stitching in the spine softened but holding. Inside, the ink is a patchwork of fresh black lines and older brown strokes that have faded like smoke. You dip your quill into the inkwell, careful not to let a drop fall on the counter, and write the day's latest entry. Buyer's name, measure sold, price taken. The plain fact is that without the ledger, your trade would be a pile of coins with no memory. A week from now, you could still hold the money, but you would not remember whose orders need filling or who owes for last month's gill. Each line in the book is its own small story. Here is the candlemaker's bulk purchase, neat and squared in the column. There is the widow's reduced price gill, marked with a faint slash that only you know the meaning of. Another entry shows the fishmonger's wife, trading a basket of salted mackerel for enough oil to keep a backroom lamp burning. A quirky habit you've kept for years is noting the weather in the margin beside your sales just a word or two. Fog, clear, wind east. You tell yourself it helps track when ships are likely to come in, though the truth is you enjoy seeing the small rhythm of days in their own quiet column. Historians still argue whether 18th century small sellers kept such detailed ledgers or if most trusted to memory. Surviving examples from larger merchants are plentiful, but few from the wharfside stalls remain. Perhaps they were lost to damp, or perhaps no one thought them worth keeping. Yours would not fetch coin from a collector, but it would tell them more than they expect. You pause to blot the ink with a scrap of linen, watching the fresh black fade to the softer tone that matches the rest of the page. Closing the book, you slide it onto the shelf beneath the counter, safe from splashes and spills. The sound of boots on the planks draws your gaze up. Another customer is on the way, and the ledger's work is done for now. Still, you feel the small satisfaction of knowing that the day's trade is captured in ink before it can slip away in the noise of the harbor. You reach for the ladle again, but your eye catches the smudge on your right thumb, a dark, inky shadow that no amount of wiping on your apron will remove. It isn't ink. It's lamp black, the fine soot that creeps into your skin from handling oil day after day. It lodges in the lines of your hands and under your nails, making them look as if you've been stoking a fire even when you haven't touched the hearth. The plain fact is that lamp black doesn't wash out easily. Soap softens it but never clears it, and scrubbing only roughens the skin until the black finds new places to settle. You've seen other sellers whose hands are stained nearly to the wrist, a permanent mark of their trade. Some hide it under gloves in finer company, most don't bother. The next customer to arrive is a miller you've known for years. He glances at your fingers as you pour his pint and grins. "Proof you're selling the real thing," he says, nodding toward the smudge. You laugh once under your breath, it's true enough. No false oil leaves a mark quite like this. A quirky bit of knowledge floats back to you from a passing sailor's tale. Lamp black, gathered from soot and mixed with linseed oil, can be used as ink. He claimed his ship's log was written in it when the regular supply ran dry. You've never tried it, your ink is thin enough already without adding oil, but the thought lingers each time you see your own stained skin. Historians still argue whether tradesmen in your century cared about the marks of their work or wore them as unspoken badges. In portraits, hands are always clean, but in life, you've yet to see a cellar of oil without the telltale smudge somewhere. The miller takes his measure and leaves a coin with the casual flick of someone who's been paying you for decades. You close your hand around it, feeling the grit against your skin. The coin will carry a bit of the black with it, passing it on to someone else before day's end. You wipe your hands again, not to clean them, but to shift the oil into a more even coat, so your grip on the ladle stays sure. The black remains, as it always does, and you return to your work without thinking more on it. By late afternoon, the harbor has grown quieter, as if the tide itself has lowered its voice. A faint drizzle begins, first as a scatter of drops on the canvas above your barrels, then as a steady, misting fall that blurs the masts into gray shapes. The air takes on that damp weight that settles into clothes and hair, softening every sound. The plain fact is that drizzle changes the smell of the wharf. The salt sharpens, the fish stall's scent mellows, and the whale oil grows heavier in the nose, less sharp, more like a warm cloth steeped too long in the same water. The boards underfoot darken in broad strokes, their grain standing out in relief. You pull your hood up and shift the barrels closer together, more for the comfort of order than from any real need. The drizzle won't harm the staves, but the habit of tending them is hard to break. A stray drop from the sky might find its way into the bunghole if left open, so you check each one, pressing the stoppers down until they hold firm. A quirky memory comes to mind. An older seller once told you that drizzle was good for trade because it made people want to light lamps earlier. Nothing like a gray sky to make a man think his eyes are going, he'd say, and a lamp's cheaper than a new pair of spectacles. You're not sure it's true, but you've noticed more late-day sales on damp afternoons. Historians still argue whether stalls like yours stayed open in all weathers or if sellers packed away when rain set in. Some accounts suggest hardy persistence. Others mention canvas awnings drawn tight for shelter. Here, the decision is simple: you stay until the last customers are gone, drizzle or no drizzle. The fishmonger's boy trots past with a bucket, the rain collecting in the folds of his shirt. He flashes you a grin, showing a mouthful of bread crust, then vanishes into the fog that's begun to drift between the stalls. From the lane, a woman in a bonnet approaches, her steps careful on the slick planks. She buys half a gill, tucking the jar deep into her shawl before heading off toward the narrow streets. You watch her disappear into the same gray curtain, her shape fading like a lamp behind frosted glass. The drizzle keeps on, tapping gently at the canvas, a rhythm that makes the harbor seem slower still. You rest your hands on the counter, breathing in the softened air, and wait for the next figure to emerge from the mist. The drizzle has settled into a fine mist by the time the last real light begins to drain from the harbor. A tall man in a patched coat approaches, the sort of buyer who lingers more on price than quality. He rests his elbows on the counter and eyes the barrels as if considering a wager. "I'll take what's left in that one," he says, nodding toward the cask you've been drawing from all day. You know his type, waiting until the hour grows late, hoping to catch you tired and ready to bargain. The plain fact is that oil doesn't spoil between now and morning, but to him, the end of a day's measure must seem like the end of its worth. You tell him the price without lowering it. He sighs, scratches his jaw, and offers less. You shake your head. The drizzle has dampened your sleeves, but not your resolve. He tries again, this time with a coin and a promise to take all you've got before nightfall. You counter with the same price, slower now, letting the silence stretch between you. Some haggles die on the vine when the seller simply waits. A quirky bit of market lore says the last buyer of the day should never be refused, lest they carry away not just goods, but luck. You've never found it to be true. Luck is as fickle in trade as it is at sea, but you think of it as you watch him weigh his choice. Historians still argue whether colonial markets had set closing hours or if stalls shut whenever trade ran out. Some sources speak of bells marking the end. Others suggest it was the lanterns, or the lack of them, that told buyers when the day was done. Here you close when the last real customer has gone, not when a clock says so. Finally, the man shrugs and pays your full price, perhaps deciding that the drizzle and the dimming light are not worth the extra argument. You draw the last ladle from the cask, tilting it to catch every drop, and pour it into his tin. When he leaves, the cask is light enough to move without strain, the hollow inside smelling stronger now that it's bare. You set the empty barrel aside, its head tilted forward to drain what little remains into your recovery jar. The drizzle has begun to ease, the mist lifting from the boards in faint curls. Soon it will be time to stow the tools and roll the barrels back into their night's shelter. But for now, you wait, in case one more figure comes down the lane before the day is fully done. The lane stays quiet for a few minutes after the bargain hunter leaves, the boards glistening under the last of the mist. You take that as your cue to begin the slow work of packing away. The funnels are first each wiped clean with a twist of tow, the rims dried so no stray drops will sour overnight. You set them in a nested stack on the lower shelf, handles all facing the same way for morning. The ladles come next. You tilt each one over the recovery jar, letting the final beads of oil slip down, their weight so slight you can barely feel them fall. The plain fact is that these last drops matter. They might not fill a measure, but over weeks they add up to enough for a lamp's worth of light. Ropes are coiled carefully, their ends tucked in so they won't unravel in the damp. You hang them from the stall's side, where the night air will dry with the mist left behind. A stray gull watches from the rail, head cocked, as if deciding whether there's anything worth taking in this quiet ritual. A quirky thing you remember from your first year selling, an old seller told you to always wipe your tools before stowing them, even if you'd be using them again in a few hours. "The work thanks you in the morning," he'd said. You didn't believe it until the day you skipped the step and found every handle sticky with half-dried oil that took twice as long to clean. Historians still argue whether small stallholders in your time used specialized cleaning cloths or simply rags salvaged from worn-out garments. Some inventories mention fine linen for filtering oil, but say little about the cloths for tools. Here, your rags are old shirts, their seams crooked from years of patching. When the tools are set aside, you sweep the stall's boards with a stiff brush, pushing stray crumbs of bread and fish scales toward the lane for the gulls to find. The smell shifts subtly as you work less oil in the air now, more of the salt damp rising from the planks. The harbor sounds have dimmed to the low groan of a ship settling against its moorings and the occasional splash from something unseen. You take one last look at the stall, the barrels still in their neat row, and feel the small satisfaction that comes from knowing you'll find it in the same order tomorrow. With the tools stowed, it's time to move the unsold casks back to their night shelter. You set your shoulder against the first barrel, feeling its weight shift reluctantly onto its edge. The iron hoop presses cold against your palm as you guide it forward, step by step, the dull thud of wood meeting plank marking each turn. The plain fact is that rolling a full barrel is not so much about strength as about patience. Let it tip too far and it will lurch ahead. Hold it too stiffly and you'll fight every inch. You've learned to work with the weight rather than against it, letting its own momentum carry it over the boards. The storage shed is only a short way down the pier, but the space between stalls narrows in places, forcing you to angle the barrel just so to pass. A pair of gulls hop aside, squawking as if offended by the inconvenience. The fishmonger's boy calls something about making way for the light, and you shake your head without breaking stride. A quirky method you once saw from another seller flashes in your mind. He would lay down short planks ahead of his barrels, so they rolled on clean, smooth wood instead of the warped boards of the pier. It worked well enough, but took so much time to set up that you never adopted it yourself. You prefer to keep the barrels moving. Historians still argue whether wharfside sellers in the 18th century stored their casks in communal sheds or guarded their own small spaces. Some records suggest tightly regulated storage to prevent theft. Others imply a more casual system where each seller knew which dark corner was theirs. Here, your space is a narrow slot between a cooper's stack of spare hoops and a wall that smells faintly of pitch. You ease the barrel into place, chalking it with a wedge to keep it from shifting. The next cask comes easier. The day's sails have taken some of its weight, and soon you have the row tucked in, each head facing out so you can see the brand marks at a glance in the morning. The shed is dim and close-smelling, the air thick with a mix of old wood, iron, and the layered sweetness of oil that has seeped into the boards over years. You stand for a moment in the quiet, letting your breath settle after the slow work. Outside, the harbor creaks in the fading light, and you know the stall will soon be as still as this space. When the last barrel is settled into its place, you make your way back to the stall for the final small exchanges of the day. The fishmonger is already wiping down his boards, the slick sheen of seawater washing away the last traces of scales. He glances up as you pass and calls you over, a half loaf of bread in one hand and a small wrapped bundle in the other. "Leftover," he says, holding out the bundle. You untie the twine and find a modest fillet of salted fish, firm and pale against the paper. The plain fact is that small trades like this stitch the wharf together, an oil measure here, a bit of bread there, fish for light, or light for fish, each stall leaning on the others in ways that rarely make it into a ledger. You hand him the bread you carried in your bag from earlier, still soft at the middle. He takes it with a grunt of thanks and sets it aside. There's no weighing, no counting. The exchange is measured only by the memory of other small trades, each one keeping the balance even without saying so. A quirky bit of his talk comes as you tuck the fish into your sack. He swears the salted catch from this batch will last twice as long if kept near a jar of oil. Something in the smell keeping the rot away. You've never tested it, though you suspect the only thing it would keep away is anyone with a nose too sharp for comfort. Historians still argue whether such exchanges between neighboring sellers were common practice or the exception. Surviving records focus on coin, not on these quiet moments of barter that left no paper trail. But here on the pier, you've seen them every week more reliable than some paying customers. The fishmonger's boy waves as you head back toward your stall, the gulls circling lazily overhead now that the day's scraps have dwindled. The light is thinning, the drizzle gone, leaving the air with a cool edge that hints at the coming night. Back at the counter, you slip the fish into your bag alongside your pouch of coins. Both will follow you home, though in different measures, one to fill the table, the other to fill the next day's barrels. The harbor smells sharper now, the day's heat gone, the tide shifting somewhere beyond the pilings. Soon, the stalls will be empty, but for this moment, the wharf still hums faintly, carrying the last trades of the day like a slow tide. The harbor falls into the kind of hush that isn't silence so much as a softening ropes no longer slap, only sway. Gulls circle higher and call less. footsteps turn from the flat beat of work to the lighter shuffle of going somewhere else. You feel it first in your hands, which stop reaching for the ladle without your telling them to. Then you feel it in the boards, which hold fewer boots. The lane between stalls widens as men drift away in twos and threes, voices lowering as if the evening itself asked for courtesy. Lanterns begin to bud along the pier, a wick coaxed to life behind cloudy glass here, a low flame built inside a tin there. The first light is always timid, a little smoky as the wick finds its draw. You watch one near the fish stall steady itself, the flame shrinking and then rising again like a creature settling into a nest. The plain fact is that whale oil keeps a small, stubborn light, the sort that holds in a draft if the chimney is right, and the wick cut clean. It is the same light that will soon ride home in crocks and tins, to burn above tables with bread and stew, to keep a hallway from swallowing a child's steps. Your canvas is tied back, your tools already wiped and stacked, but you linger under the stall's eave and let your eyes move with the lanterns. Their glow is thin and yellow, not bright enough to banish darkness so much as to carve out little rooms in it. Along the pier, those rooms open and close as people pass, the light sliding over coats, catching on a brass button, glancing off a wet board. From the town's edge where the street climbs away from the water, you catch the first hints of tavern life waking. A laugh too broad for daylight, a scrape of chair legs, a fiddle's testing note that stops and starts as the player finds his tune. Boston breathes differently after dark, and the wharf breathes with it, slower and lower, as if saving its strength for morning. It is no secret to anyone that taverns are the living rooms of the town. Men who spent the day at rope, mast, cask, or stall take their talk there, along with the coins that rattled in their pockets all afternoon. You slide your hand over the head of the nearest empty barrel, feeling the brand's shallow valleys under your palm. The iron hoops are cool now. The day's warmth has gone from them. A lantern 2 stalls down spits once, then steadies. Its keeper licks his thumb and pinches the wick top to take the mushroom off, a clean nip that makes the flame burn truer. You've done the same move 1,000 times without thinking about it. A curious scrap you once heard in a tavern comes back. A man swore that trimming a lamp wick with the edge of a shilling made it burn honest and even. He said it as if the coin's roundness could persuade the flame into good behavior. You've tried knife, scissors, thumbnail. You've never tried money. A watchman's rattle clicks faintly at the far end of the pier, more a reminder than a warning. Somewhere above the roofs, a bell gives one plain stroke for the hour and then leaves the rest for guesswork. Historians still argue whether the wharf lanes kept any regular lighting by the town's hand in your century, or if these pinches of glow came almost entirely from private lanterns, and whatever the moon contributed. Some records talk about orders for lamps along certain streets. Other lists are silent, and the boards under your boots suggest the silence might be the truer story. Here, the night relies on little flames born in small cups. A man you recognize only by his walk passes, with his shoulders hunched against a breeze that wasn't there a moment ago. He lifts 2 fingers in greeting without turning his head. Behind him, the fishmonger's boy, washed and wrapped now in a dry shirt, carries the day's last bucket to the rail and throws it out in a glittering arc. The water fans through lantern light in a brief, quiet show, then falls away and is gone. Your own stall's corner lamp burns within its tin guard, the punched holes making a simple pattern of stars on the board behind it. You adjust the wick down until the flame knits to the smallest usable size. Light is coin, and there is no reason to spend more of it than the empty stall requires. A bit of soot gathers at the chimney's crown. You wipe it with a twist of toe and watch your fingers come away dark, the old lampblack finding its way back into your skin as it does every day. Beyond the pier, in the darker reach where the masts turn into black stitching across the sky, a lake crew coils a line with the quiet competence of men who have learned to spare their throats after sundown. One of them hums a tune that doesn't carry enough notes to name. It is the kind of sound that can belong to any decade and any dock. The tide answers with its own rhythm against the pilings, slow, patient, always the same and never the same twice. You step out from the eave and walk the short length of boards between your stall and the shed, testing with your boot the spots you know will be slick in the damp. The lanterns make shallow puddles of light that your feet enter and leave, each one a brief stage on which your shadow bows once and exits. At the shed door, you touch the wedge beneath your nearest cask not to move it, only to confirm it still holds. The habit comforts you in ways you can't quite explain. Turning back, you pause where the pier opens to the wider harbor. In the distance, the town is pricked with points of flame in windows, little constellations stitched to the hills. Somewhere among them, 100 small suppers are finishing, pewter plates are being stacked, children are being sent to fetch more oil for the night's last half hour of reading or mending. The plain fact, simple enough to make you smile without showing teeth, is that much of that light traveled through your hands today, poured, counted, corked, and carried away. Close by, a pair of younger men lope past toward the taverns, one of them teasing the other about a girl who pours ale with a steadier hand than any of them could manage on deck in a swell. Their laughter flares and fades in the space of 5 steps. The wharf absorbs it, the boards accepting whatever lands on them. Fish, oil, boots, stories. Historians still argue whether such places left more trace in ledgers or in memory. The ink says one thing, the bones of the pier another. You suspect the truth is mixed like a lamp's fuel, part oil, part air, kept together by a wick that no one sees while it's working. Back under your eave, you lower your own lantern to a sigh. The flame nods and then composes itself into a small straight tongue. You tie the last knot, check the last latch, and listen once more to the lane as it goes from almost quiet to quiet enough. The taverns will take the night's loudness into their rooms. The pier will keep the soft sounds that need distance water, rope, wind. You stand a moment longer than you need to, letting your shoulders settle to a weight that isn't work. Then, you turn toward the narrow streets, your pocket heavier with coin, your sleeves still faint with the smell that will follow you home. You turn your back to the harbor and begin the slow walk home, boots finding their old path across boards that give way to cobbles and then to packed earth. The wharf breathes behind you, ropes settling, water-licking pilings, a gull's last half-hearted cry while the town gathers itself into evening. The streets narrow as they leave the open water, bending around yards and small gardens, slipping between houses that lean toward one another as if to share a bit of warmth. Window shutters are half closed, a few ajar to let out the day's heat and keep in the night's comfort. The smell of the wharf loosens its hold as the lanes take over. Here it becomes a braid. Smoke from hearths, yeast from alehouses, tallow from kitchens where suppers are clearing, and the ever-present hint of damp wood that all towns near the water know. Your own oil clings to you, a faithful companion that cares little for the company of other scents. You pull your collar up more from habit than cold, and let the road lead you along the curve you could walk with your eyes closed. The plain fact is that Boston streets in your time do not run straight for long. They were laid by feet, not by rulers' cowpaths hardened by years of passing, then given names by men who prefer a line on a list to the memory in their boots. A lane stutters uphill and then slides down into a hollow where rain lingers in shallow puddles. Another splits around a crooked fence and then reunites as casually as neighbors meeting at a doorway. You do not mind the bends. They make the walk feel familiar, a conversation you have with the town each night, repeating the same phrases until they soothe. Ahead, a watchman's figure stands at a corner, staff in one hand, a small lantern in the other. He gives you a nod when he recognizes you, or at least your smell. A dog lies near his feet, chin on paws, one ear cocked toward an argument unspooling outside a tavern door. The watchman shifts his weight and taps the staff once on the ground, a reminder that street voices carry. The argument quiets by a degree, not from fear, but because everyone is a little tired of adding words to the day. You pass houses shouldered close together, their clapboards weathered, their doors glossed with oil where many hands have pushed them open. At one window, a candle blows slightly toward the glass, wick cut short and even. At another, a lamp tilts a soft circle over a child bent at a hornbook, the letters faintly visible before the child yawns and rubs an eye with the back of a hand. Light moves through these rooms as if reluctant to leave one before stepping to the next. Your chest lifts a touch at the thought that some of that light began in your barrels this morning, traveling by ladle, measure, and crock to rest in these small circles. You step aside for a handcart trundling the other way, wooden wheels catching in the rut and then freeing themselves with a little hop. The man pushing it murmurs to his load the way men do when they've spent a day moving weight and haven't yet learned to stop speaking to it. In his wake trails a thin line of sawdust from the carpenter's yard, a pale ribbon you could follow with 2 fingers. Near a doorway, someone dumps a bucket full of gray water into the gutter. It finds its slow course downhill, reflecting a broken crescent of the lantern above before it slides into a crack and vanishes. A small curiosity lives in these lanes, one you've watched for years. Onions and garlic hung from kitchen rafters not just for cooking, but because some housewives swear the scent keeps illness from settling. A sprig of rosemary, a cut orange if coin allows, a vinegar-soaked rag near a window household charms against bad air, each as certain in its home as a latch on a door. Whether they work or simply organize worry into neat bundles you cannot say, but you notice them as you pass and count them like familiar milestones. Historians still argue whether the town made a true habit of lighting these streets by public effort in your century, or if most lanes relied on the spills from windows and the courage of those who walked them. Lists of orders for lamps exist in some years, complaints about broken glass and empty oil in others. You accept the compromise you can see, a watchman's lantern here, a tavern's bright spill there, and in between, the moon when it bothers to show. Tonight, a thin edge of moon rides the roofs, enough to silver a puddle and edge a signboard with a narrow blade of light. You continue past a bakehouse with its oven cooling, the door propped open to let out the last of the heat. The smell of crust lingers, warm and brown, carrying a low promise of morning loaves. A cat slides from a doorway, turns twice on a warm patch of stones, and decides against whatever small hunt had brought it outside. It threads between your feet as if this is a path you share by agreement and disappears under a stair. The lane narrows further where a fence encroaches. You skirt along its edge, hand brushing the rough slats, counting them without meaning to. On the far side, a kitchen garden breathes damp leaf smells into the night, cabbages still beaded with the day's mist, a row of herbs tied up to dry near a stoop. Somewhere, a woman calls a name once, then again, not sharp, just patient. A child answers, too close to the tone you remember in your own youth for you not to feel it in your chest. The town offers small hazards and small graces in equal measure. A stone shifts under your heel and corrects itself before your boot rolls. A crooked step up from the gutter forces your weight forward, and you catch the fence post with 3 fingers, then let it go. From a casement above, a voice hums the middle of a song without its beginning, neither happy nor sad, just traveling a familiar path toward the last note. You pass beneath and do not look up. The hum is not for you, but it marks the hour more faithfully than a bell might. You think of the day folded behind you, barrels rolled, measures poured, coins counted, and feel none of it pressing for attention. The town's evening has a way of smoothing edges. Your smudged hands are tucked into your sleeves, your shoulders drop a finger's width, and your breath goes in and out without your asking anything of it. You consider briefly whether you will climb the steeper lane that runs along the churchyard or take the longer path that curls by the pump. The pump wins. Its handle clacks like an old friend's cough, and you stop for a moment to wet a scrap of cloth and wipe your face. The water is cold enough to bite and clean enough to make you draw in a slightly deeper breath when you lift your head. A boy passes at a run with a message, his hair still damp from a hasty wash, his bare feet slapping stones in a rhythm that goes up the street and vanishes into the next. Behind him, the watchman taps his staff once more and turns his lantern toward a darker nook, ensuring that what is there is only shadow and not mischief. The town has its troubles, as all towns do, but this street tonight carries more weariness than worry. When your own corner comes, you turn into it by muscle, not thought. The cottage waits with its small sill of herbs and its door latch polished by your hand and a few others. A neighbor's window shows 2 figures bent over mending, the thread catching the light each time the needle arcs. You nod to no one and to everyone and step toward your threshold without hurry. The oil smell on your sleeves follows, quieter now, as if it knows there is a line it cannot cross without softening. The door gives, the hinge voices its old complaint, and you are home. The street behind you narrows to a strip of dark and lamp and voices braided thin. In a moment, you will set your pouch down, draw water to warm, and sit where your boots have always lived. For now, you stand with your back to the door and let the small, ordinary weight of arrival rest where work used to be. Inside, the room holds to its simple shapes. A table with a wobble you've learned to ignore, a stool that knows your weight, a peg where your apron waits like a tired flag. You lift the apron down and feel the day in it the thick, sweet heaviness that rides the cloth as if it had sewn itself into the threads. Your shirt answers with the same stubborn smell when you pull it over your head. The garments are not soiled in the way mud soils. They are soaked with a thing that clings more like a thought. Still, there is the evening's small work to be done. You set the kettle on to warm and fetch the wooden bucket from the corner. Lye soap sits in a cracked dish near the hearth, pale and grainy where it is dried between uses. You fingertip a shaving from it, as you have on countless nights, and let it slide into the bucket's first inch of warm water. The plain fact is that most households like yours lean on soap made from ash, and fat strong enough to bite at grease and sweat, mild enough if you do not leave it to chew the cloth too long. The smell of the soap is sharp and homely, a clean bite that doesn't quite overtop the wale on your sleeves but meets it head on. You work the apron first soaking, wringing, scrubbing the worst places against themselves, then the shirt, turning the cuffs in your hands until the seams give up their faint gray. The water clouds, as if it remembers every hour of the day, and gives them back to you in a single basin. You change it once, then again each time shaving more soap and stirring with your knuckles until the chill gives way to warmth. The boards under your feet take a few drops without complaint. In this room, everything knows the business of water. You pause to rub the cloth at the neck with a pinch of fine salt, a habit you learned from a woman who kept house for a merchant and swore it loosened whatever sweat set there. She also told you to air shirts in a cross draft if you could, claiming the breeze would take what water left behind. You have found it to be true enough, though your breeze tonight comes only as a small sigh under the door. There is a curious trick you tried once and have not repeated. A neighbor insisted a splash of sour ale in the rinse tames a stubborn scent. The shirt came out smelling like a brewer's floor and grew no sweeter for the drying. Another man swore by a handful of crushed mint in the bucket. The leaves turned the water green and left your cuffs looking as if the garden had borrowed them. People bring you these little receipts the way they bring you talk of ships, part hope, part habit, part the simple comfort of telling someone what has worked for them on a day when little else has. Historians still argue whether Boston households of your century commonly used chamber lye for washing saved and diluted, or left such strong measures to the fuller's yard and the professional laundress. Some diaries hint at its use for linen. Other accounts keep quiet as if the method were understood but not often written down. You have smelled the fuller's corner in summer and believe both may be true. Some tasks kept for the yard, some for the kitchen tub when coin runs thin. You pull the plug of the bucket with 2 fingers and watch the gray stream thread toward the door's sill, then replace it and pour in clean water for the rinse. The shirt moves easier now, the cloth letting go of the weight it was carrying. You shake it once, listening to the wet slap that marks the end of the hard part. In the corner, a small jar of blue powder sits corked, a gift from a house that can afford such refinements. You touch the cork but leave it be. A whisper of blue in the rinse can make linen seem brighter, so the tellers say, but you keep the powder for Sundays and for the one good collar you wear when a ledger must be balanced at a merchant's table. You wring the apron and shirt until the sleeves twist like rope, then carry them to the chair that stands near the hearth. The fire is shy tonight, the room warmed more by the kettle than by flames, so you set a line and hang the pieces where what heat there is can find them. Drops gather at the hems and patter to the floor, soft as mice. You catch a few with a cloth at your feet, more out of habit than need. The air changes as the wet cloth warms a mingling of lye, damp cotton, and the ghost of the day's oil. You know from long practice that the smell will never quite leave, not while you work this trade. It fades to a memory, returns when rain swells the thread, hides in the folds, and then steps out again if the room grows warm. You make a kind of peace with it, the way a sailor makes peace with creaking, accepting that some sounds live in the wood. A plain, bookish fact that once made you smile drifts up as you tidy the washing things, the bright, clean-burning candles that the finest houses favor, those made from the head matter of the sperm whale, shed less smoke than the common oil you sell day by day. Lamps fed with train oil will always leave a trace on chimneys and cuffs, while spermaceti's proud boast is steadier light with fewer stains. The city's evenings are tiered in light as surely as they are in coin. You sell what most can reach, and you mend your cuffs like most must do. You lift the shirt's hem and breathe near it, testing. Better. Not sweet, but better. If the wind holds right, the night will finish the work of clearing the last of the sharpness. You rub your forearms with the leftover warm water, the skin waking to the lie's small bite, and then pat yourself dry with the clean corner of a cloth. On the peg by the door hangs your spare apron, the one that never seems to lose the old scent no matter how you coax it. You leave it there. Tomorrow demands only one layer, and you prefer to start the day with a thing that has at least tried to be clean. The bucket is emptied and set upside down, the soap returned to its dish, the rag wrung and spread where the fire can find it. Historians still argue whether such evening washings were a weekly rhythm or a nightly one among sellers like U-books show Mondays given to laundry in many homes. Yet some work leaves its mark too strongly to wait 6 days. Your hands answer the question for you. They seek the soap most nights, and your sleeves follow. When the last drop stops tapping the floor, you pull the line a little tighter and step back. The room looks like itself again, simple, ordered, a place where things know where to rest. The day's smell has softened to a tolerable echo, the lye nipping just enough to claim the room as clean. You rub your thumb across a lingering shadow of lampblack near your nail and let it be. Some signs of the day belong to the day after and the one after that. You draw the pouch from your belt the way a man lifts a sleeping cat slowly, with 2 fingers keeping the weight from waking all at once. The cord gives, and the day loosens into your palm in the form of coins. Dull silver with smooth noses, copper with nicked edges, a few bent discs that have learned your pocket's curve too well. You pour them onto the table in a small, obedient hill that spreads until each piece finds its place against its neighbor. You begin, as you always do, by listening. Coins tell you things before you look at them. Silver has a thin, quick ring. Copper makes a shorter note as if it had run out of breath. Badly clipped pieces click without any pride at all. You tip 2 together, cheek to cheek, and the sound decides whether they stay in the better pile or slide off to the side for another use rent, perhaps, where no one bothers to be sentimental about the music money makes. The plain fact is that Boston's trade keeps odd company in your hand. You handle more Spanish milled dollars and cut bits than you do British shillings. The empire's coins do not come ashore here nearly as often as its goods. Silver from Spanish America passes as if it belonged, chopped into eighths when a hole is too grand for a gill of oil. Copper halfpence have seen more thumbs than any diary page, and local coppers pretend to be respectable beside them. Paper notes appear now and again, promises written in careful ink, crisp today and somehow smaller tomorrow. You keep them flat in your ledger because hope folds more slowly when pressed between pages. You set the first small stack of silver to one side, the honest pieces that still carry a profile deep enough to catch at the cloth when you brush them. The edges on some are so worn you could roll them along your sleeve and never raise a thread. You group the tired ones together. A friendly merchant will take them at face. A less friendly one will admire them and then count them slowly as if age stole weight. The copper pile grows by habit into neat towers. 6 and 6 and 6 again. A pattern your hand likes because it can be done with eyes closed. A curious superstition you've picked up, and indulge without admitting it, is to tap the day's first coin against the tabletop gently 3 times before you sort the rest, one for the morning's weather, one for the afternoon's custom, one for the night not taking anything back. Nonsense, all of it, but the rhythm pleases your fingers and seems to keep the coins from rolling off the edge. You do the 3 taps now, soft enough that only the wood knows. Historians still argue whether everyday sellers like you kept scales at home for weighing doubtful silver, or whether such niceties lived only behind merchant counters. You've seen balances on desks finer than any spoon in your street, with weights in dainty boxes, each stamped as if the box were proud of its arithmetic. Your own weighing is the old-fashioned kind hand against hand, sound against sound, a squint at the edge to see if the teeth have been shorn away by someone with more patience than scruple. Perhaps the records will say you should have owned a scale. Your fingers insist otherwise. You run a cloth across a pair of milled dollars and watch a gray shadow come off on the linen. The coins smell faintly of your stall. The oil has found them as surely as it found your cuffs, so you wipe them again until the shine returns in a manner more imagined than real. There is pride in setting aside the cleanest for the week's store bill, as if the shopkeeper will be fooled into thinking your pocket keeps better company than the wharf. You make your notes in the ledger's back pages small private counts that do not need the front's neat columns. Candleman, 4 tins, paid. Widow, 1 gill, marked. Fish, trade, fillet. The pencil's scratch is friendly in your ear, a tame sound that belongs to rooms, not to peers. A lamp on the table burns low, its wick trimmed close, giving exactly the kind of light your buyers like to brag about later, steady, modest, and thoroughly unremarkable. You prefer it. The remarkable has a way of costing more in repair than it earns in satisfaction. A bit of fringe talk comes back to you as you sort a handful of coppers. A tinker swore he boiled his coins once a month in vinegar and sage to wipe the curses off them, and claimed they spent easier afterward. You imagine a pot of simmering money scenting a kitchen like a stew you'd never dare taste. If luck could be scrubbed into a coin, the wharf would be full of shiny fortunes and empty purses. You keep your vinegar for pickles and let the coins carry their own histories. You pause over a cut piece of 8 that has been neatly nipped into a wedge. The notch is tidy, the edge trued up with a file by a careful hand. Such fractions move easily in a day's business, though they multiply the counting the way rabbits multiply themselves. You stack them into a circle to prove to yourself that a whole coin still lives among the pieces, then scatter them again because they are more useful broken. It is a small lesson the town teaches you over and over. Completeness is handsome, but change is what pays. The pouch lightens as the piles find their homes, 1 box for rent, 1 for stock, 1 for the stubborn little needs that crop up at inconvenient hours. New toe, a better rag, a nail to replace the one that gave up holding your ladle hook. The box for stock gets the widest shoulders. Barrels drink coin the way lamp wicks drink oil steadily, and with the air of doing you a favor by staying lit. You set aside enough for the cooper because hoops have their own opinions and must be persuaded with steel and pitch and men who know the temper of wood. You rub your thumb along the day's last copper and feel the fine grit of its wear. It must have ridden more pockets than you have years, buying bread, then ferrying back as a change piece for nails, then perhaps sitting in a church plate long enough to learn patience. The coin comes to rest with its small brothers and does not object. Coins seldom do. They excel at being agreeable until they are asked to stretch. Students of tidy charts would like to know exactly how much foreign silver moved along these cobbles in your time. What share was Spanish, what share Portuguese, what sliver French, and whether paper truly lagged or led in confidence when weeks ran sour. Historians still argue the proportions with numbers the town itself would not have recognized on any given Thursday. You shrug in their general direction and keep 2 truths in your head. You are paid in whatever the buyer's pocket throws up, and you spend what the next counter will accept without a lecture. Between those truths stretches a day's work. You fold the ledger closed and tuck the pencil into its frayed tie. The lamp gives a small sigh at a draft nosing the door. You cup the chimney and turn the wick a thought lower, a gesture that saves almost nothing and pleases you more than it should. The room smells quietly of warm metal, damp thread, and the distant, familiar ghost of the wharf that refuses to admit it is no longer here. The coins you keep for yourself a few. Not many go into the small dish near the hearth. You like to see something round, and certain catching the fire's light when you sit. It's not abundance, it's the suggestion of it, which rests the mind nearly as well. You run a palm flat over the table to gather any stray grit, then lift the pouch once more. It is friendly, light now, a soft thing, tamed for the night. Outside, a cart mutters to itself as it passes, wheel complaining at one nick, agreeing at the next. You set the pouch aside, listen to the lane sorting its late sounds from its later ones, and let your shoulders drop another notch toward the evening. The arithmetic is done. Tomorrow will have its own sums and its own arguments with hoops and noses and weather. Tonight, the numbers fit inside the book, the coins in their boxes, and your hands in your lap, where the lampblack will stay until morning, when water will persuade only the topmost shade to leave. The room is small and familiar, holding the evening the way a cupped hand holds water. You set the small fillet of salted fish on the table, break a crust from the half loaf, and eat without ceremony, each bite steady and plain. The fire gives more glow than heat, a thin rind of orange that wavers when the draft finds the crack under the door. The kettle hums, a sound that blends with the soft tick of the table as it settles against the day's damp. Your shoulders ease, the weight of barrels and coins and measures unhooking by degrees, until the ache is simple and not a complaint at all. You warm a little water and rinse your hands once more. The lampblack clings, as it always does, the lines at your knuckles holding shadows the lie cannot argue out. The plain fact is that this work marks a body as surely as it lights a room, a faint perfume of oil inside the threads of your shirt, a dull shine on the apron pocket where coins nest, a softness in the palm where the ladle's handle sits. You do not object. The marks are not a story. They are the day's handwriting. You trim the lamp wick with a pinched thumb and forefinger, nip and twist, then lift the flame again to the smallest steady tongue. The room tames itself under that light corners become ideas instead of edges, and the shelf with your folded cloths turns into a line of small hills that do not need climbing. You listen beyond the door, a cart respectfully distant, a pair of footsteps traveling together and then parting. The watchman's staff tapped once as if the hour wished to announce itself softly. A curious thought pads through, uninvited and welcome. The candlemaker's talk of horsehair strainers, the fishmonger's lore that oil can soothe salt, the widow's unadorned thanks. All of it belongs to this day, the way the gulls belong to the morning, brief and ordinary, and therefore worth keeping. You imagine for a moment a string tied around each small instance, ladle to tin, coin to palm, nod to nod like floats along a net that will not be hauled but will drift behind you until sleep takes the line. Historians still argue whether evenings in houses like yours were given to reading, to mending, or to the blank business of resting by a fire that can carry a man a long way without moving him at all. Lists and letters preserve the literate answers. You provide the other one, a chair, a low flame, and a body that has already told enough stories to wood and iron for one day. You lean back and let the chair speak in its mild creak, a quiet that belongs more to boats than to rooms. You set the pouch where you can see it, not to count again there is nothing left to prove, but because seeing the promise of tomorrow's cask inside a small stack of metal eases the mind the way a calm tide eases a hull. The lamp nods once at a whisper of air and then resumes its small, uninterrupted duty. The kettle purrs itself into stillness. Somewhere in the hearth, a coal clicks like a button falling into a box. You draw the blanket over your knees and find its familiar worn edge with your thumb. Outside, the narrow street has thinned to occasional shapes passing light, each step a little island of sound with a wake that closes quickly. The town will keep breathing without you for a few hours, and when you wake, it will still be there, requiring only that you roll your barrels forward and accept the terms of light and smell and coin again. That is enough of a future for tonight. You lower the wick until the chimney's glass holds only a faint golden pulse, and the room accepts the dim. Your eyes follow that last coin of brightness until it becomes the color behind your eyelids. One more breath, then another, slow as harbor water against pilings. The wharf recedes. The chair stops being a chair and becomes simply the place where the weight leaves you. The room stays the same shape even with your eyes closed. Table, chair, peg on the wall, each a quiet landmark in a small country you can cross, without lifting your feet. The lamp is turned low enough that it no longer makes a pool of light, only a memory of one. The thread of warmth along your shins is thin but certain, like the late tide finding its usual stones. You let breath become the only work. In, a small tide. Out, the same water returning to itself. The day takes its places behind you, barrels, measures, coins, moving further back with each slow exhale until they stand in order along the wharf of thought and wait without calling your name. The smells of the stall turn gentle in the room's warmer air, softened by soap and wool and the faint ash of the hearth. They become something like weather, present but not demanding, a quiet reminder that tomorrow has a path ready and does not need planning now. A chair creak is a lullaby. The kettle's silence is another. If a cart passes, it does so at the very edge of the world and leaves no ripple where you are sitting. Even the watchman's staff, clicking once, sounds like a far-off buoy in a harbor you know by touch. The blanket seam under your thumb is a shoreline. You follow it to the place where your thoughts grow slow, and then slower still. The lamp gives one last, steady breath of gold. You lower it to almost nothing, and the room receives the dark without surprise. You settle as a barrel settles when the hoop is right-held, quiet, and shaped to the night. The tide turns somewhere you do not need to see. Your eyes are heavy and kind. Sleep comes in on soft feet and finds you where you have been waiting. We hope this slow day at an old trade has been a peaceful escape. If you found it comforting, you may like, share, or leave a thoughtful note. And you can subscribe, so you'll be with us for the next quiet craft from the past. End of script. Sweet dreams.